In the year 2149, when the planet's population has severely declined due to chemical warfare that resulted in the air being poisonous, the governments collapsed. Those who survived spent every waking day inside individual cement pods with built-in air purification systems to protect them from inhaling the deadly air from outside. One of the survivors is Darwin. The first thing he does every day is contact his mother through the computer, which serves as the survivor's mode of communication. However, the computer always tells him that his mother is asleep. Just like the others, Darwin is forced to sit all day on a chair, doing his job as a miner in exchange for his shelter, food, and entertainment. The only time he gets off the chair is when the computer notifies him to shower. The miners are tasked to extract minerals using remotely controlled tractors. The minerals will be used to build other, more sophisticated pods. During a short break from his job, Darwin orders food which will be delivered to him at noon, showing that he can do almost everything with his computer. A newsflash then appears on the screen, reminding him that the air outside is still deadly. It serves as a warning not to leave his pod. Before bedtime, he can play a game for a couple of hours, but even this cannot fulfill the emptiness he feels. He always dreams of the time his mother left him inside the pod, telling him he's the future and that one day he will figure it out. However, every day is the same. He still doesn't know what those words are trying to tell him. Things begin to shed light when he hears a familiar sound one day while doing excavation work. In the nearby forest area, he sees a dog being dragged by someone back to the forest through the tractor's camera. Darwin stares in confusion, fully knowing that the air outside is toxic. And if the air is toxic, how is a dog able to survive? Before he can think much of it, the virtual warden orders him to continue working or else he will be replaced. Darwin obeys. Later that night, Darwin wakes up to a thunderstorm, and the next thing he knows, a bolt of lightning hitting his pod. It causes electrical overload, shutting down his pod. He pushes the emergency button several times, but nothing happens. After 2 days, his pod's reserve power level slowly drops to 0, which means the air purification system is also down. Realizing that no one's coming to help him, Darwin uses a respirator and presses a button to unlock the door, but it also doesn't work. He then unlocks a panel to manually lift the door. After years of confinement, Darwin carefully steps out of his pod. He starts walking in hopes of finding help, but only a few feet away from his pod, the respirator alerts him of the dropping oxygen level. Darwin rushes back to his pod and immediately tries to close the door, to no avail. Darwin takes a deep breath, knowing it might be his last, before removing his mask. However, he realizes that the air outside is breathable, and it being poisonous is a lie. He remembers what his mother told him, and believes this is what she meant, or if it isn't, his mother might need his help. So he embarks on a journey to his mother's pod. Since he hasn't walked more than 10 feet for the past 9 years, Darwin's body is fragile, and the trek through the rocky terrain will be very hard for him. He then reaches a machine to alert the authorities, but he finds that his credit is unavailable, so he decides to continue. He endures what feels like days of walking without any food or water under the sun despite his fragile state. He starts to think he will not make it until the familiar barking of a dog from the forest reignites his hope. When he reaches the forest trying to follow the barking sound, Darwin encounters insects for the first time in 9 years. It proves there are indeed signs of life outside the pods. In the middle of the forest, Darwin eventually passes out due to a lack of food and water. Darwin wakes up the next morning and sees the dog he was looking for standing beside a girl named Dara, who proceeds to ask him his name. But because Darwin has lost the ability to speak after years of not using his voice, he is unable to answer her. In fear, Dara runs away with the dog, and Darwin tries to catch up with her in hopes of finding some help. When Dara realizes that Darwin is following her, she alerts the other survivors living in a small camp. She arrives at the camp and informs Lillian, their guardian, about Darwin. Lillian thinks that Darwin is not a threat, so she decides to offer him food while respecting his boundaries. Darwin accepts all the food and slowly lowers his guard until he is seated with them at the table. Lillian tries to communicate with him, but learns that Darwin cannot talk due to having used only a computer for years. But he can understand everything they say. Lillian then offers him shelter for the night, which he gladly accepts. Despite having the chance to feel normal again, Darwin promises to himself that his stop is only temporary, and he will go looking for his mother again. The next morning, while having tea, which Darwin tastes for the first time in his life, Lillian asks several questions about him. With Stephen's help, who places his hand above Darwin's as Darwin pretends to type in a keyboard, Darwin explains what happened to his pod. He is also able to tell them his name. That night, Darwin asks them if they know anything about his mother, but no one knows what happened. He explains that he hoped his mother would alert the authorities and would come looking for him, but it's been days. Dara tells him he is welcome to leave if he wants to find his mother, but he needs to get some sleep first. In the dead of the night, Darwin reaches his mother's pod and calls out to her. Suddenly, the alarm goes off and a drone finds him. Darwin runs for his life until the drone catches up with him and demands he give up the whereabouts of the people who helped him. He refuses, but the drone scans his brain, showing his memories of the camp. He screams at the drone, telling it to stop until he wakes up. He's having a nightmare, and Dara arrives to comfort him. As the days pass by, Darwin begins to learn to live normally again. Lillian offers him clothes, and Dara teaches him how to shower properly with real water. After changing into his usual clothes, Darwin approaches Stephen and Dara, who are planting some seeds in a plant box. Dara asks him if he wishes to stay, but he cannot answer properly, so she teaches him basic response gestures. Darwin agrees to stay longer in the camp with them. Darwin's bond with Dara starts to grow stronger, with Dara teaching him everything, including the ability to speak again. He gets fond of living with the family, but Beth, one of Lillian's daughters, worries that Darwin might lead the authorities to them when they come looking for him. Lillian assures her it's not going to happen, hopefully. However, Beth cannot keep it to herself, so she tells Darwin about it. Darwin realizes that he's putting the family's safety at risk. The next day, Lillian takes them swimming, which Darwin experiences for the first time. Dara takes him to the top of a mountain, where she explains how men in the past did not leave their households to make children throughout the other continents to repopulate the Earth. It is now part of the law due to the plummeting human population. Dara tells him how she wants her husband to stay with her forever and not leave like all fathers do. She then confesses her love for Darwin, and they share their first kiss. Later, the family head back to camp, singing. On their way, Beth asks to exchange towels with Darwin, but Dara stops her, so she turns her attention to Stephen instead. Stephen refuses at first, but Beth pulls the towel, leaving a piece of cloth behind them. The drone spots the cloth and immediately flies off to pursue them. Stephen hears the drone and alerts everyone. They immediately hide behind the rocks, and the drone starts to scout the area. Luckily, no one gets spotted by the drone, and it leaves moments later. Back at the camp, Beth erupts in anger and blames Darwin for almost getting caught by the authorities. She asks Lillian to get Darwin to leave, but Lillian refuses to acknowledge her pleas, saying how she cannot do that. Beth storms off, frustrated about the situation. Dara comes upon Darwin sitting alone outside the camp. He expresses what troubles him, knowing that he is endangering the lives of the family who cared for him, and tells Dara he will be leaving. Dara gets upset, mentioning how Darwin promised her he'd stay. She storms off, leaving Darwin alone with his thoughts. Later, Darwin prepares to leave, and Lillian gives her a flash drive with credits to contact his mother once he gets there. He then says his goodbyes, asking Lillian to tell Dara he loves her. Dara watches Darwin from above in tears as he makes his way out of the forest. After days of hiking through the familiar trail he once traveled before, Darwin arrives at his mother's sector. He contacts her, telling her he has come to see her. Darwin soon arrives at his mother's pod and knocks at the door, asking her to let him in. He also tells her that the air is safe to breathe. However, instead of seeing him, his mother sounds the alarms, and a drone arrives to interrogate him about his disappearance. Darwin explains that he's been inside his mother's pod all this time. The person behind the drone believes him and orders him not to leave the pod unannounced again. Darwin tries to convince his mom again, and the door finally opens. He enters the pod and sees his mom again after 9 years. She has now reached the point where she only believes in the life inside the pod. Darwin borrows her computer and tries contacting the World Authority, but his message cannot be delivered. He then checks the footage of his home surveillance camera and discovers clips of his journey and everything he did with Lillian's family. He is confused. Why has no one come to arrest them? Darwin realizes that no one is actually watching them. Before he leaves, she asks if he ever finished playing the game, and Darwin confirms. She touches her head where Darwin had kissed her and smiles, before continuing to play the game again, just like many others who are too afraid to go out of their pod due to the fear instilled by the World Authority in their mind. Darwin makes his way back to the camp and encounters the drone again, but this time he refuses to obey its command. Nothing happens. He reunites with Dara, who welcomes him with open arms. Together, they start a new life with the rest of the family without fearing for their lives. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and click here for another movie recap video.